Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today I'm going to do a part two to the previous video I did about the question, why is there human suffering? Now, as I mentioned before, there was a part that I had done when I thought I had lost the video, and I had re-recorded everything. And one of the things I thought about before I decided, okay, I'm not going to re-release that because some of it was additional information as well as some of the previous stuff. And I didn't want to kind of release two of the same video. So what I wanted to do was there was one issue I think that I didn't really cover in a lot of detail, and that was the issue of if we're dealing with this topic of why is there human suffering, and we say, okay, well, now that we've dealt with it just from just looking at it outside of any kind of dealing with how the universe came about. I think I did talk about that a little bit, but I want to deal with it from a different aspect. Let's put this purely in the sense that, okay, we know that there's a source of creation, meaning that there's something that either created or caused the universe to exist. Um, and in the previous video, I kind of used a map that's used when describing, in some kind of a visual method, the Big Bang to the current era, which again is conceptual because of the fact that humans have not been around long enough to really be able to start at point A, the Big Bang, to point B. And even the concept of a Big Bang is just a conceptual term. It's not like a term where there was this thing and all of a sudden a big explosion happened. I mean, that's conceptual because on our level, if you look at this, the size of even our solar system, where we live on the Earth is like very small compared to everything else. So the only thing we can use are conceptual terms to try to describe these kind of ideas. So what I wanted to do was look at this from a different perspective in terms of answering the question from, okay, looking at it, if the source of creation, if there was something that created everything, why does this source of creation allow human beings to suffer? Um, Now, in the previous video, I think I did discuss some of the ideas about the fact that, as an example, who's first of all to define what suffering is? Who gets to decide what is acceptable and not acceptable? I mean, for example, um, depending on where you look in the world, I mean, there are people who live, for example, in this part of the world where it has become mostly desert. There's some people who probably have possibly come to terms with living here. The same thing over here. There's some people who live further down and may live in some areas where it's not desert, it's more rainforest, but there's certain challenges that come with that. You may go to a different section of the world and say, okay, well, here the challenges are this and that. The challenges in some cases are, natural. In some cases, the challenges are not natural, but simply from human beings, which I guess you could say is natural too, because it's a part of nature. We're a part of nature. We're part of the system that's here on this planet. You could say, okay, well, someone, if they were somehow living in the middle of the ocean here, maybe on some island somewhere, if somebody somewhere was able to live here, everything comes with some level of challenges. And where do we get this universal the definition of what is considered suffering and what is considered to not be fair? Um, that becomes a big problem when you're looking at it from like a more, uh, you know, global slash solar system slash universal perspective. Um, looking at just like, I'm looking using Google Earth right now, looking at the stars behind it. I mean, a lot of this light, as I've mentioned in the previous video, that we're seeing could be from like, stars that were gone millions of years ago. And the light is just only reaching us now. And if that's the case, why is that fair? Why is it fair that a star was there several million years ago, and now it's not there anymore? Potentially, because again, we don't know. I mean, we're talking about something that's so far in the distance. And even looking at our planet from something like Google Earth, you get to see how small things really are. I mean, you can't see people walking around. If let's say that you were a part of some alien species that's flying around here, and you happen to say, "Hey, look at that! That's a pretty looking planet. Wow, that's really interesting." I mean, what would make you think people live here? I mean, unless you saw like a big sign, waving, "Hey, we're here." And even like I was listening to this podcast recently, but this guy who was an astronaut was saying that when he went into space, at one point he looked out the window of he was on the International Space Station, and he was thinking there was going to be this majestic thing that was going to overcome him. And he said, looked at the window, and he was like, meh. And the reason is because in our day and time, to have seen what we're seeing now is kind of like, okay, I've seen it. He said, what he was almost expecting, like what some people would say, is that everybody would get together, hold hands, and sing "Kumbaya" in the space station once he looks out the window. Um, and one of the things he was saying was that some people say that they get a very good sense looking at it that way of how we're in this together. That that the borders and things like that people put up are not natural. And he was like, we the space station. Saying it's not like I'm going to look out the window and see little dots, that like mark the countries. I mean, I know that, this is the case, so it's not like going to, provide some, revelation that, is not something to consider. So getting back to the topic of, there, okay, we accept that something created this whole planet we're on and everything that's around it and everything that allows this whole thing to function, including the air, including the water, including the ability for there to be clouds, land, all these kind of things, all the material, uh, all the things that make up the material. I mean, if you want to say, for example, dark matter exists out here in the universe. I mean, of course, this is not something that we could look out and pull out a piece of it and define it. But let's just say that we understand that there's elements to this, existence that we can't fully understand. Everything that's in the spaces here, if you will, so to speak, including in our own existence. Why is that something that would have the ability to create all of that? Why would it allow people to suffer? So again, just using this as a freestyle discussion, not specifically using, using the mindset that I developed in terms of Torat Moshe, but just simply looking at it from a more global perspective. I can think of a number of reasons why humans would perceive something as suffering that may not be suffering in one area, but also may be the result of how we want to live our lives. So here's one thing that I consider. Um, First of all, everything that we do have, this whole planet that we're living on, this came for free. I mean, there's nothing like, we had to like pay a certain bank account to have this planet. It's not like you buy a house and you have like a mortgage and things like that. Pretty much when we're born into this world, whatever is here for free. I mean, the air is here for free, the water is here for free, and the price that gets put on some of that is usually things that people create. I mean, people create those systems where you have to pay for water. I think I mentioned this in the previous video. So whatever constructs that exist that basically don't allow someone living here to be able to find water somewhere on his own and take that water and access it, unless it's a matter of the weather preventing them from doing it or the resources around them preventing them from doing it. Pretty much what remains is some country may decide this is our water right here. This is our water. You can't have that water. Some may decide this is our oil over here. Some may say, okay, I don't like the fact that you started your own little nation right here, and you're not using our resources to do it over here. I want to invade your country and take over. So that's one aspect of the concept. Now, there's another aspect, and this is kind of getting a little bit more, I guess you could say, in focus here. Let me go a little bit in. Okay, so when I was a kid, I grew up somewhere around here. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. So let's take this on a more personal aspect. Okay, when I was a first year high school student, I went to a high school called Raytown South, and it was in Raytown, Missouri. And one of the things that happened pretty much when I got there was I'd heard from someone who had a friend of mine, had a cousin who was going to school there. And he had told me he was like a second year student at the time. He's about to be a second year student. He told me that the year before I got there was a thing called Freshman Day. Freshman Day was this situation where what I will term is black upperclassmen at the high school would beat up the African American freshmen. And when he was going through that for the first year of his schooling there, this was happening every single day. Now, this was a predominantly white school, which has another dynamic to it. So I was new to this area. I was new to the schools. We had just moved to the area. We just moved to that area there, and I didn't know really anything about it besides what he told me. So I remember I get to school, and it's like, you can almost look at like going to like school, especially a first year high school when you're like new to the whole area, you don't know the people, and say, okay, this is like a zoo. This is essentially like wild animals are walking around. I don't know who's who. So one of the mistakes that I made was I made the mistake of sitting at the freshman table. I later found out that a lot of the upperclassmen there did not know where I was, so they thought I was like maybe a second year student. But the day that I sat at the freshman table by accident, because I just looked and said, okay, these guys look like they're less threatening. Let me just sit here. That was the day where I remember when I sat down, I was like, hey, can I sit here? And the guy was like, yeah. So I remember people walking by, like, hey, look at the cute little freshman. And they smack one guy in the head. And he's like, hey, we're going to get you in gym class. And they smack him in the head. And I'm like, oh, I made a mistake here. I'm at the wrong table. But it was already too late. So for that whole year, for the year I was a freshman, a first year high school student, there was a situation where we were getting beat up every Friday, not like the previous where they were getting beat up every day. We got beat up every Friday, sometimes in between. Now, when I say beat up, I'm talking about like I remember once I had gym class that first year, which was the worst thing to have, and I wish I had known that beforehand. Because when I was changing clothes in the locker room, guys would come in, grab me, beat me up, and then throw me somewhere and then run off. And I remember, and again, I'm telling this as a joke because it's years later. But I remember like some friends of mine who had made it to school who were like quote unquote white. I mean, again, everybody I think knows about my whole issue with the whole racial system in America. especially living in the Middle East. I don't have to really think about it in that way. But I remember some friends of mine that were so-called quote unquote American white. They were like, wow, I'm glad I'm not black. And I thought they were saying something racist. Like, hey, what are you talking about? It's like, man, you guys are getting your butts kicked every day, every Friday. And I was like, yeah, you got a point there, you know, because that was the language that they talked. Black, white was like how they talked. So that's for a whole year. And I'm 45 years old, and to this day, I still have some resentments about the people who did that to us. And the next year, I didn't carry that over. Now, I could look at that and say, why did the creator, of all things, allow that to happen? Why was I allowed to get beat up every single Friday for a whole year, my freshman year? But then as I got older, I started thinking about some things. A few years earlier, about 2 years earlier, I'd gone to a different school, which had a whole different culture to it. And I used to take a bus to that school. And I remember there was a kid on the bus that was not in, I guess you could say, the in crowd on the bus. And everybody, including me, we used to make fun of him a lot. He used to listen to music we didn't listen to. He was like from, kind of a different, culture than we were. So we just made fun of the kid. And sometimes, we did it in a way that, that no matter how you make fun of somebody, it doesn't, mean it's good or, in any way. But, we, said some pretty mean things to the guy. So let's take that one little point there. I say to the creator of the universe, why did you allow me to get beat up every single day for every single Friday for a whole year? That's not fair. Why did that not happen? The creator of the universe, again, not saying the creator talks to people in this way, but let's say the answer returns. Well, remember 2 years ago, that one kid you used to pick on him every single day? Well, he never got over that. He didn't get over that, and his life went spiraling this way because of what you did, and you and those other guys. So why do you deserve some special treatment based, in compared to what you did to this guy? Maybe this is what's called in Hebrew the cheshbon. The It's almost like the system of payment or the system of compensation that you're required because of the fact of what you did to this other guy. So then he could easily say, maybe in his, talking to the creator, why did you allow those guys, including Nehal, to say those bad things about me? And maybe the cheshbon there is, okay, well, remember when you did these things over here? That's the repayment for those things. So this could be expanded out for every individual on the planet, going like generations and all this kind of stuff. So it becomes a very complex system when you say, for example, why is the creator, allowing suffering to happen? And one of the reasons that's given in Torah Moshe is because we don't fully know the cheshbon. For example, we don't know if certain things that happen here, like in Senegal, where part of my family came from, that there's certain difficulties and challenges here that happen because of something that was done to maybe someone over here or some country over there or over here. There's if you, it's almost like the butterfly effect to some degree, almost like the idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings, like for example over here in the desert somewhere, that affects things like let's say all the way down here. And again, that's just a concept. It's not like a given rule, but a concept. So the question that a person would have to ask is, if I'm looking for justice in the world, how far am I looking for justice? I mean, if justice means that I may have to like put away some things that I like because I also owe on my account, if you will, that's something to consider. I mean, so, someone says, okay, well, this person here did something bad to a person over here. And then someone over here may say, well, you did something bad to me over here back then. Then someone goes, well, you did something bad over here. And everybody's screaming about, okay, well, this person did this person did that. And at some point, the question becomes, who deserves justice more than the next person? I mean, does someone over here, whose father, for example, led an army against a group of people over here, get to decide, okay, it's unjust that these guys over here took all my possessions away and sent me in exile over here? And someone would say, well, your father did it. You were right there with him when he did it. You agreed with it, and you would have done the same thing if you were old enough to do it. And this is where the cheshbon comes in. And there's an interesting, what's called a midrash, which is like an investigation of the Torah, that asks the question that when Am Yisrael, when the people of Israel were in Mitzrayim, which is Egypt here, and Moshe Rabbeinu, was in a situation where there was an Egyptian who persecuted one of the people of Israel. And basically, essentially what he did was he took the guy out. And one of the issues that's brought up in this midrash is that the reason why he did, he could easily just said, okay, I'm not going to take part in that, and I'm just going to kind of hide out. is that he had at the time a certain level of what's called nevuah. Nevuah, just to put it in short, because I mean, it's kind of a complex answer for what it means in Hebrew. It would almost be like saying that there are certain insights as well as certain levels of intelligence that the creator of all things has provided for human beings to be able to have, but it depends on the person and where they are and what kind of mindset, physically and mentally, they have about whether or not they can receive certain things, like these understandings. So the understanding that Moshe Rabbeinu had here was that the Egyptian person that he took out, if this person was to live, that his children and his children's children and his children's children, all the way into the future, would oppress the people of Israel until, if you will, the end of time, if you will. So the cheshbon, the justice of that, is that seeing that this person will raise up a nation or generation after generation of people who will do evil in the world, if you will. That was the decision that was made, that okay, this person has to go because of the future that this person will bring about. You could look and say, okay, sometimes there are questions that people say, well, there's a dictator who was here at one point, who did bad things all across, like here, and all over. If someone were able to like say, okay, his great 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 grandfather, does A, B, C, and D, and he will produce a grandchild who will do A, B, C, and D, and a son who will do this, a grandchild will do this, and on and on and on. If a person has that kind of insight, the question becomes, what do they do about it? Especially if it's like clear, 100% clear, clarified insight that it's the correct thing. Which again, we can get philosophical about how do you know? Let's just say that it's known 100%. There's a methodology somewhere in the universe that allows you to know it for certain, or allows that person to know for certain. Then you get into this issue of, okay, well, justice becomes very complex when you deal with all of the things that exist around the world. I mean, for example, you have situations where, and I think I talked about in the other video, let's say you have an oil tanker that's poorly constructed, that's going across here, and all of a sudden spills oil right there and destroys the entire ecosystem from here to here, as well as damaging the lives of all these people here. Well, at one point, who becomes responsible for that? We can cry out to the creator and say, well, why did you allow that to happen? And there's actually a midrash that talks about that too. And it deals with the idea of, in Hebrew, what's called avodah zarah. And the basic principle that's discussed in this text, this midrash, is why is it that, for example, the creator of all things allows people to do avodah zarah? Or in English, usually you say idolatry, but if you look at my video about avodah zarah, it explains it a lot better. But let's just say idolatry, because most people are listening to this in English, that's what you understand. Let's say, why would the creator allow people to come up with these ideas? If it's so wrong, why allow them to have it? So the response of this particular midrash, is this text, because it's presented as a question to someone, is, well, let's think about all the ways that people do avodah zarah. So there are some people who do avodah zarah or idolatry to trees. So do we destroy all the trees in order to stop them from doing it? Maybe. There's some people worship rocks. Do idolatry to rocks. Do we destroy all the rocks in the world in order for them not to do that to rocks? Maybe. What about the water? There's some people who say, okay, well, this water thing is now my avodah zarah. I'll do avodah zarah with this. Well, now do we destroy the water? And then it essentially says, well, there's some people do stuff to the sun. They have avodah zarah about the sun. Well, do we try to destroy the sun all of a sudden? The stars? Do we destroy the stars? We can't even get to the stars. We can't. How far do we have to go in order to get justice here? And then it ends with something like, there's people who worship other people, who do idolatry for other people. So do we destroy all the people now? And the issue is that if we have been placed on this planet, if we've been placed in this universe, and we desire a certain level of freedom, and the creator is willing to give us what we believe is good, we would also have to accept that freedom has a price tag along with it, and not a price tag that always is something where you pay, but that is something that you have to deal with the reality as it is. And that's why I say that there's a certain rabbit hole you go down when you start saying, well, what is just and what is not just? And you would have to have something way bigger than people to be able to determine what that means. And there are some situations where we may decide, okay, it's not fair for me personally to be going through this. But then you may look at, if someone were able to see the cheshbon on your bank account, if you will, your personal, physical as well as non-physical bank account, someone could say, well, you're getting a better deal than what you deserve. You deserve a lot more than what that is. And that's where, these realizations come about. So, if we're talking about it from, again, we can talk about it from more an agnostic as well as atheistic aspect of it, because again, I take more of the again, because we're talking about the source of creation, not like deities, like, gods and all that stuff that have feelings and emotions and want revenge, would get angry and all that kind of stuff. The creator of all things has no emotions, according to Torah Moshe. The texts are written in a way so that people can understand them. Otherwise, we'd have some heavily metaphysical texts that most people, if anybody, would understand. But the reality is that if we're on this planet, if we didn't pay for it, we don't really have, the right to say what happens here. I mean, on some level, I mean, we've been given it to, how we manage it is up to us, as individual and as a whole. But the challenge then becomes, if I didn't pay for the air, you know, what right do I have to say about what happens with air? I didn't pay for the water. I didn't create it. I don't have anything to say about any of that stuff. I mean, it could just simply be that these are resources that I'm supposed to use in a certain way, and it's my responsibility to use it the proper way. But then the problem comes in, well, what if the next guy chooses not to? Um, and there's an interesting question. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Amnon Yitzchok, who at one point he used to do these seminars where people who, Jews, in Israel could come, and, essentially ask questions about Torah and halakha, and he would answer. And he would also debate it if, if somebody wanted to like argue and debate, say, I don't agree with you, I don't believe in this, and things like that. So he would, openly discuss those things. And any question was like open game. It didn't matter what kind of questions people had. So there was this one guy who asked him, about like, okay, why is it important, for a Jew to be concerned about another Jew not keeping the Torah? What difference does it make? He asked him, like, oh, so you don't care, somebody doesn't keep the Torah? He's like, no, I don't care at all. He's like, what difference does it make? So he's like, you probably don't even care about your own, things you're not doing toward the Torah. He's like, okay, whatever. So he said, let's imagine this. Let's say that me and you are on a ship. He's like, oh, we're on a ship now. He's like, okay, fine. We're on like a little small boat, a very small boat. So he said, okay, you have a paddle, a group of paddles. I have a group of paddles. We're in the boat together. You decide you're going to take your paddles and throw them in the water, and then you're going to put a hole in the boat. Is that okay? And the guy was like, perfectly fine. No, I'm sorry. He reversed the order. He said that me and you are on a boat, and you have a group of paddles. I have a group of paddles, and we're in a small boat in the ocean here. I decide I'm going to take my paddles and throw them away. Is that okay with you? And the guy was like, yeah, perfectly fine. Doesn't matter. So he said, I'm going to put a hole in the boat now, and we're sinking. Is that okay? And the guy's like, perfectly fine. He's like, okay, well, now you can sink and drown with me, and that's the basic issue here. That one aspect of it, and this is kind of ending a little bit, is that humans, I think most people I think I know want to be free to kind of do whatever they want. Interestingly enough, people can complain about the creator not doing A, B, C, and D and human suffering, but then they allow governments to do certain things. They allow their local administration to do certain things. Or people allow their husbands and wives to do certain things to them, as well as their children. So if human beings want a certain level of freedom, at what point are we saying that the creator of all things should step in and take away certain people's freedoms? At what point, for example, does the creator say, okay, this group of people here, you've done wrong over here, so you got to pay for that? But then what happens if people over here say, well, these guys here did this to us, and then here and here and here and here? Where does justice start and end, and for who? For who does justice start and end for example? And that's where there's no real way to logically, from our human perspective, to be able to do something like that without some kind of insight that allows you to see where all the angles are. I mean, so it's almost like saying, person living all the way over, let's say here, making a decision about something they're going to do, and being, a person over here, being able to see where all those decisions go at the end of the day. This person is a female. She has these possibilities because she's female, and these are all the directions she can go with it. In this direction, that direction, this direction, that direction, and only 5 of these are, 4 of these are good. 1 of them is horrible. It's horrible for everybody across here to here if she makes that one decision. All the other ones, maybe you could say the other way, like she's going to have 4 possibilities that are horrible for everybody around here. 1 of them is only bad for people here. What decision do we make? What's the ramifications of doing something about it or not doing something about it? And that's the challenge with that issue. So as we can see, there is no one clear-cut, all encompassing answer for any of this stuff. I mean, this is a development process. People are a development process. All of us are a development process. And as I mentioned previously, if you look at it from a military perspective, I mean, you can look at all of this that we're in on this planet, in the universe or whatever, as almost like boot camp. I mean, for the real thing. For example, that's another aspect. Who's to say that the existence we have now is not like a dream, and then the next thing, after we pass away or whatever, is the real world. Maybe this is not the real world in a sense. I mean, this is all somewhat metaphysical in some level. These are all considerations, not like hard truths. So again, the basic issue here is that the Torah, when it was given to the Am Yisrael at Har Sinai, is understood to be the basis of creating human society. Just like the 7 mitzvot of Noah, the 7 mitzvot that people who are not Jewish are supposed to follow, are the basis of establishing reality, but they're not the end all of reality. Meaning, it's like this is the starting point from which we build everything else. So that if those things were put into place, in a proper way with a certain development, that could change a lot of things in the world. But again, it's up to individuals to decide and maneuver and manage those things. It's not the end all, for example. So there's no magic book out there that answers every single question. I mean, the thing is, you live and you have questions and you deal with challenges. And I'll leave on the fact that I remember once having a rabbi that I was listening to who was saying that he had this situation come up when he was a young rabbi, of an incident that basically shook him to his core, and he didn't know how to address it. So he went to a rabbi that he was older, who he would learn from, and he was like, "Tell him, it's like, I've got this issue that changes everything. I don't know how to address it." And the rabbi told him, "Was like, look, I don't have the answer for you. That's something that you have to figure out. What I can tell you is you're not the first person to have that question. You're not the first person to have a question. You're not the first person to have a challenge. You don't you think that this rabbi here, or this leader here, didn't have his own questions and challenges? So the thing is, take what you know, use the tools that are available to you, and work through things. And that's the only that's the method. That's not the answer, that's the method. I mean, the answer may already be there. I mean, it could be that you already have all the tools you need to make things work. It's just a matter of, you might sometimes need the ability to see the forest from the trees, so to speak. It may be that, for example, you're over there drinking poisonous water when the clear water is over there flowing down a mountain, a waterfall, and you're ignoring it. There's a lot of possibilities there, but it's up to you to determine how you're going to move forward in that reality. So again, this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and I hope I've kind of finalized that issue. And I think this video came out a lot better. So I appreciate anyone who's willing to listen. And whether you agree or you don't agree, that's up to you, and that's perfectly fine. So have a good reality, if you will, and take care. Bye-bye. Now I got to figure out how to turn this thing off. There we go. Stop share and off.